Stitching with Cindy Bots. Today I thought I'd just take a moment and take a step back and do more of an introductory to quilting. I did one when I first started my YouTube channel, and I don't know, I just felt that I needed to take a step back, and for those that are just starting their journey with quilting, to talk about some of the terms, some of the things that we use when we're quilting, and that's what I'm going to do today. So for those of you that are new to quilting, there are so many products out there on the market, and it is easy to be overwhelmed. You really don't need all that much to start quilting. Just pick and choose depending on your budget. Of course, you're going to want a decent sewing machine. I have out my Husqvarna right now, but this is a very expensive machine, and I've had it for several years, and the computer board has gone out on it. So this is now my backup machine that I use just for piecing. Piecing is another term for when you're assembling your pieces of your block, and it just means sewing the seams together. So let's start with the basics. So it's very important to have an iron. Now there's a lot of fancy ones on the market. Some have special safeties in them. Some, when you lay them down after using them, pop back up. It's really about your budget and your preference. So this is a nice Black & Decker. I'm really happy with it. I don't tend to use the steam function on it, but it does have a steam function, and it's just a nice solid ironing machine. Iron for ironing. Now this is a special iron that I picked up, using a coupon or something, or birthday present. I picked this up. I really don't use it. I know some people really like them. I haven't used it in ages. It's been collecting dust in my drawer. So if I was new to quilting, I'd say save your money. And if you want to get one later, by all means go ahead, but I wouldn't get it to start with. The other thing is a wool mat. Now I have this nice wool mat. I've been using it for quite a while. When I first started quilting, I took an old TV table, fold-up table, that a wooden one, and I covered it with some batting and some fabric and made an iron board cover, and I used that for a long time. Some people swear by the wool mats. It really, again, is a preference. So if you want to just pick up, a cheap ironing board, I also have one that I use sometimes that is, maybe 3 feet long, and it folds up for storage. And you can buy just little pressing mats. You can make your own. I know I saw just on the YouTube, on the internet the other day, someone was making a pressing board for their binding, and they just use a piece of wood, some batting, and a canvas-like material. So really, there are ways to keep your beginning budget down when you start quilting. It's really up to you. The other thing on the market recently are these turning cutting boards, and they're nice for doing small pieces and cutting things without having to move your material. I did get one. I had a gift certificate from someone, and I used that to keep the price down on it. I tend not to use it as much as some other people I know do use theirs. I tend to stick with just my regular flat cutting mat, the self-healing cutting mat with your rotary cutter. Now with the rotary cutter, you can get different handle styles, you can get different sizes. I've been using this size, this 45 millimeter, for a long time. My sister likes a smaller size. She says she can get better curves with it. That's something I want to try to see if I can get a little bit better accuracy and do curves better. So that's a few of the basics to start with. Let's move on to your sewing machine itself. Now, the sewing machine itself has this part here. I believe they call this the throat. I could be wrong on that. And for my machine, this machine, and another machine, I don't have a wide enough surface. You can buy aftermarket little sewing tables that come up and give you much wider surface for sewing on. This is very important for when you're quilting so that your project is more stable. All right, so without it, you can see where the bar comes in, and then I have my spot for my bobbins and stuff, and I just remove that, and this fits right in there square. Okay, before I had this, I was just stacking up some books to make a wider surface that was level with my machine. So again, depending on your budget, your finances, what you can get to start with, that's kind of where you go. All right. So the other thing we have here is a 1/4 inch foot. Now it has this little part that protrudes out that rides right where you butt the fabric up against it, so you know you got a 1/4 inch seam. So this is your presser foot. This is a 1/4 inch foot. You can get a customized foot for doing free motion quilting. There's also a walking foot. Now the walking foot allows the top of your material and the bottom of your material in your quilt sandwich to go through under your needle together. Now this is called the feed dogs here, and when you do typical normal sewing, that is what moves your material through under your needle. When you do free motion quilting, you lower these, so then you are moving the material where you want it to be, not just back in a straight motion. Okay, so your machine will have some directions on that. The other thing that should have come with your machine are directions for cleaning it, and that is an important thing to do, to take out the bobbin. This is the bottom. This is the bobbin right here. Now, when you're using your bobbin, please be sure to use the bobbin that is recommended for your machine. Now, this machine, I can tell these bobbins compared to my other machine bobbins by the color. This machine has colored bobbins. So you want to, if you have multiple machines that you're using, you want to mark your bobbins somehow, keep them in different containers, something so that you know the difference. Now they also have stitch lengths, and when you're sewing regular, you have 1 stitch length, and when you're doing your quilting, you have you should widen your stitch length. You should lengthen it. Some of the other things that I want to talk to you about are turning tools. Those are important to have, but again, you don't need to buy something super expensive. If you take a trip to the dollar store, I use just this simple turning tool that I got. They have a ball at the end. If you're trying to turn something right side out and you're using a point, you're going to poke through it. Okay, so this end I would not use as much as this bigger, wider end. And sometimes I use a paintbrush because it has a nice rounded edge that I can get in the corner with. Again, you don't want to use something sharp. Okay, so the other thing we want to talk about are scissors. You need to invest in a pair of scissors that you're going to keep just for fabric. Now, you can buy decent scissors at Walmart. This is a really good pair that I've been using. It was not very expensive. It was under $10, I think. And I've gotten Fiskars before, and I really like them. Again, you can pick them up at Walmart for a decent price. You can get them on Amazon. The other thing I like to have is a pair of just snippy type scissors. Now those I use for cutting threads when I'm sewing. The other thing, if you know on your machine, there's a spot on the machine, it might be on the back and it might be on the side, that is a thread cutter. And you might want to check into that. That's pretty cool to use when you're sewing also. In between things, you can just snip that thread. Now this is a seam ripper. You can get these from your quilt shop, at Walmart, wherever. Some people call them Jack because of Jack the Ripper, and you'll see things on the internet like I had a long date with Jack, things like that. So you do unfortunately need a seam ripper. If you try to take out your seams with scissors, you can very easily cut your fabric, and you really need a seam ripper to do the job properly. Let's talk just a little bit about threads. Threads. You can get embroidery thread, you can get bobbin thread, you can get quilting thread. There are so many different kinds of thread out there. I personally use an all-purpose thread, but it's a quality thread. I use Gutterman. There are other threads out there that are good also. That's just the one that I tend to use. I don't tend to use a different thread for my bobbin. Some people like to do that. They swear by that. Again, there's a lot of things that as you go along with your quilting, you will find work best for you, work best for your machine. Be careful when you're picking up quilting thread that you don't purchase hand quilting thread. You do not want to put that through your machine. It is not good for your machine. It is specifically for hand quilting. The other thing we can talk about, we talked a little bit about using the rotor cutter. The rotary cutter, there are so many rulers on the market. Do not feel overwhelmed by the rulers. Just take a deep breath when you're in the shop and you see all those rulers. You just need a couple to start with. I would recommend that you get either one long ruler and maybe a couple smaller ones for different purposes. So the long ruler for cutting fabric, this one is an 18-inch one. I also believe I have a 13-inch one. You don't need both to start with. You can add to your collection later. The other thing that if you're using, if you plan on making things with half square triangles and such, you really need a triangle square up ruler. This one happens to be a Quilt in the Day one. There are other brands out there, but this you lay on your triangle and you trim it, and when you open it up, it's the proper squared up thing. So if you plan on using patterns that have half square triangles, you really need the square up ruler to make your life better. If not, there are ways to do it without the square up ruler, just using your regular ruler. It's more difficult. I'll just be honest. It is more difficult. But it can be done. The other thing is, I did not have these when I first started quilting. It's one of the things I picked up later. As you can buy on the internet now, different size square templates or rulers. And if you're making a project that has a lot of 5-inch squares or 4-inch squares, these come in handy. You don't need them. You can cut a 5-inch square using your mat and your regular ruler just fine. Like I said, I did that for years, but recently I did make the investment into getting a set of these, and they're quite helpful. The other thing that's been hitting the market lately are a lot of templates for quilting. And what you do with these is you either use your walking foot on some kinds of templates, and you just keep your walking foot right on that edge or in the groove. Some of them have a groove that you're supposed to stay in. Others, like this one, you just draw with your heat erase pen. There are special pens out there that you can draw on your material with, and then when you iron it, the ink disappears. So there are templates out there, there are rulers. Again, the templates are something that you can advance up into. They're fun, they're different. I've invested in some. I've used them, well, I started to use it once, and then I just fell back into my old habits. So, don't feel like that. If you're a beginner quilter, you have to have all these things. Grow into it. See what you like. All right. Again, here's another ruler. It's just a small one, especially if you're traveling to retreats and stuff. You might need to bring different size things. The other thing that's new recently to me are these clips. Now, for the longest time, I used just my regular pins from sewing. These ones are kind of thick, and they have the balls on the end. And then I graduated to these thinner, longer pins that have the flat on it, and these are nice. There are some times when you want to pin something that clips don't work for, but there are so many times that I use the clips now. I really enjoy these clips. My sister turned me on to them, and they're wonderful. I mean, she also turned me on to these pins instead of my other pins, and these do work so much better than your regular typical sewing pins. The other thing I would suggest is that when you're like in the dollar store and you see little things like this to hold things in, like when I'm sewing, I can take off the clips and have this here just set here, and when I take off a clip, just drop it in there, and just to try to keep your workstation clean and uncluttered, because my sewing room has to be straightened all the time. It's just totally cluttered. The other thing is you want to get maybe a few little things to hold different supplies in. And one of the things I suggest is your safety pins. Be careful when you buy your safety pins. You do not want the big chubby ones. The big chubby ones have a thicker dimension here that goes into your fabric and can leave marks or small holes. These are designed for making your quilt sandwich, and they have that little bend to it, and they work out nice. They're nice and sharp pointed, so they work out well. Now the quilt sandwich, that is really up to you how you do that. Now, for this project, I chose just a tone-on-tone fabric. A tone-on-tone fabric is a fabric that has the same color on it as the design, a tone-on-tone. And let's see if you can, nope, right there, I think you can see a little bit of it. It's a very faint design, and that is what that is. Sometimes they're different designs. Sometimes they're more like watercolory type splashes. Sometimes they're big flowers. I have one that's snowflakes, but it's done in the same tone as the background, the print on it is. All right. So that's tone on tone. This is my quilt sandwich. Now for this, I used a white background and I used flannel. So here's my white background, my backing. This is my backing piece. And then this is the flannel here, and then the top. Now you also want to put a hanger on this if you're going to use it for a wall hanging. And that just means it's a way to hang it on the wall. There's different techniques for doing that. A lot of times it's just a like a little envelope or a little sleeve. It's a sleeve, that's what they call it, a sleeve where a dowel rod slides through, and that holds, then you hook the dowel rod onto something, some kind of hook on your wall, and that steadies it on the wall, keeps it nice and even, hopefully. A couple of mine are a little bit slacking. They're too heavy for the dowel rod I chose. So the other thing are needles. Now needles come in different sizes. This is a universal needle. Usually I use a universal needle, and you need to be careful that your needle is the type for your machine. Don't just grab any needle off the off the rack, you want to be careful on it. Also, you want to read the directions for your machine, and there's a flat side up here on the top of the needle and a rounded side. For a good number of machines, that flat side goes to the back, but there are some machines that is not how it goes, so that you need to check on your machine. And there is a little knob here for mine, a little screw. Pop it up and pop it out, pop in the new one, and tighten it up. Your machine may be a little bit different. There are quilting needles, and there are sewing needles. There's needles for jeans. There's all sorts of different needles. So you do want to have a little supply of those. I tend to break needles more than I wish, and yeah, that's just who I am, I guess. So the other thing we want to talk about is some other terms. A pre-cut. Let's go. I got some notes here. So a pre-cut is the material that's already been cut for you when you buy it at the store. Your stash is the fabric that you have on hand in your home. Now, scraps are simply leftover pieces of fabric from projects. Crumbs are those leftover scraps that are very tiny. Strips are pieces that have been cut into a strip. This piece, this project here is considered scrappy because it has all sorts of different colors. These are strips of material here. All right. When you sew several strips together, let's see, I got a couple strips here. When you sew several strips of fabric together, let's just kind of make it like this. All right, so several pieces. Oh, let's see. Sew several pieces together to make one long piece. Okay, that is called strip piecing. And what you do is you sew the strips together to make a wide piece, and then you cut using your ruler or your template, triangles, etc., octagons, that type of thing, hexagons, out of the piece material that already has the strips on it to get the desired effect, especially like I said with triangles. That is strip piecing. Okay. Blocks. Blocks are the subcategory of your quilt. So this is one block. This block would be sewn into a quilt with other blocks. On this quilt that I have here, this is one block. It makes up a pattern in the quilt by placing it next to other blocks. This quilt has, this is a wall hanging that I'm working on. It has small blocks and a large block. All right, and it is sewn in a method similar to quilt as you go, and that is a technique where you lay down a piece of fabric onto your batting and your backing, and then you sew the seam. And since you're sewing through the backing and the batting, it's already quilted, and you fold it back. And there's all sorts of different patterns and techniques for joining those blocks together, and that's really fun too. Now, when you choose your batting, I use a lot of flannel. The loft is how fluffy your quilt will be when you use it. Okay, so that quilt sandwich is made of those 3 layers. The top is the actual piecing part, your blocks and things. Some people call that a flimsy. I have a wall hanging flimsy right here. This is my wall hanging top for my Missouri Star wall hanging that I'm making. And this is made using pre-cuts. Again, that's when the store is already cut your fabric to a determined size. This was using a charm pack. Charm packs are 5-inch squares, layer cakes are 10-inch squares, and jelly rolls are 2.5-inch strips. There's benefits and drawbacks to doing charm packs, layer cakes, and jelly rolls. They give you a good variety of fabric that go together, all from the same design line. And that's, you know, the good part of it. Most of my fabric I buy by the yardage. I buy half yards, which are 18 inches. A yard is 36 inches. The width of fabric is usually 40. Sometimes it's different, especially if you're buying backing. That's usually 108. You can also get 90-inch wide fabric for backing. And it just depends what you're purchasing. So when you're doing your quilting, you want to be mindful of colors, and you can see here where in this quarter square triangle that these two show up really well, but these two different fabrics are too close together in their hue or their tone. They're too browny together, and the print just blends in as one print. So that's one of the things to be mindful of. Now this is a half square triangle, and there's several ways to make those. And this here one is a quarter triangle, quarter square triangle. Okay, so that's the difference between those. Now chain piecing is when you run one square or piece of material through the machine and you do not cut the thread. You just go ahead and run the next fabric through, and then you have these connected by that thread, and you just keep going and going. So the next one, and then when you're done you separate the threads. That is called chain piecing. So we got strip piecing, we have chain piecing. Now here you can see that I have 4 blocks that have been put together without sashing. Sashing is when you put a strip of material between your blocks. I have a couple blocks here that have been connected with sashing. So this has a nice border here and another border here. This is called sashing through the center here. And then this is the border. Now you put the binding on so that you do not see where the border and the raw edge of the backing and the inner batting or flannel or whatever you're using come together. Now a snowball is when you take a square and you take off the corners by adding a triangle piece to the end. All right, so we've talked a little bit about snowballs, that is just the name of a block, and it's like a half square triangle or a quarter triangle. It's a specific piece that goes into your quilt, into your block making. You build on those things. The salvage of your material is the raw edge here. This is the salvage, and you want to make sure you trim that off when you're cutting your material. You do not want that in your quilt block. When you're sewing, some people like to use a leader ender. So if I was sewing this piece of fabric through, I do my nice sewing, and then I might take a scrap of the salvage or something and slide that part through, and then slide this part through before I snip that thread, so that when I go to start my next piece of sewing, I don't lose my thread through my needle. It just holds the thread in a piece of material so you're not rethreading your machine all the time. And that was something I learned on the internet just recently, to use leaders and enders, so that I don't have to keep reusing my machine. And you can run this one through, you can have a second one for the other side, and then just keep going. Next time you're done, use this one as the ender, and just keep running the same little scrap of material through so that you don't have to keep threading your needle. All right, so a scrappy quilt has all these colors. We've talked about chain piecing and binding. We talked about stencils. The other thing you can do when you're quilting is do echo quilting. Now I've attempted here to do stitch in the ditch right here, and if I came out just a little bit farther it would be more of an echo stitch. All right, but I did attempt to go right there between those seams right there, and that's called stitch in the ditch. Free motion quilting would have more of a wave or just a free design, freehand design. Again, you can lay stencils on it and do quilting that way, and that's fun. We talked about the walking foot. Seam allowance is, again, usually 1/4 of an inch. When you're designing a quilt block, I like to use my graph paper. And for seam allowances, you got to remember that if you want it after it's sewn to be 2 inches, you got to cut it at 2.5 because you want 1/4 inch on each seam. So 2-inch square becomes a 2.5-inch square, so that you have your 1/4 inch on both sides. A bolt usually has 15 yards of material on it. WOF means width of fabric. Some of the patterns are now coming up with that. Crumbs are your smaller scraps. And let me see if there's anything else I really wanted to just talk about. I guess that's pretty much it. I just wanted to take a step back. For those that are just starting to quilt, I hope you join my my YouTube channel and join me on this adventure in quilting. I'm trying to put up at least one different quilt project a week, and some weeks I have more time and seem to have more projects finished that come up on the site. But please feel free to leave a comment that you enjoy them, you think they're cute, whatever, or if you find that you'd really like to see more, like doing more tote bags or doing more pot holders or things like that, or doing more seasonal things. Love to hear what your opinions are. You have a great day, and thanks for stopping by. Bye-bye now.